Who cares about number time?
What's up, y'all? I'm Deeg, and today we're diving into Alabama's NFL production since the year 2000. That is, how much Alabama's players have produced statistically once they enter the NFL. Per my metrics, here's how Alabama stacks up in NFL production per position group. First in running backs, third in defensive backs, fifth in defensive line, seventh in wide receivers, 11th in linebackers, 33rd in quarterbacks, 38th in tight ends, and I do not have a comprehensive offensive line ranking, but we will hit on some of the Bama highlights for this position as well. While a lot of these rankings are really solid, most Alabama fans would see this and think they should be much higher, and the reason is simple: Nick Saban. So let's take a look at how differently Alabama ranks since 2010, when most of Saban's players started getting into the league. First in running backs, first in defensive backs, third in wide receivers, third in defensive line, fifth in linebackers, 28th in quarterbacks, and 35th in tight ends. For the purpose of this video, I will focus on the numbers since 2000, but I will also show how they've changed since Saban came along. Let's dive in. Starting off with running back production, which is second to none this century. Alabama running backs have combined for 53,542 rushing yards this century and 448 rushing touchdowns. The only comparable school in this time period would be Miami. The production started off with Shaun Alexander in the early 2000s when he amassed 9,453 rushing yards and 100 touchdowns, which per my numbers recorded the third best season by a running back this century in 2005 when he had 1,958 scrimmage yards and 28 touchdowns. After Shaun, there is no lack of stud running backs from Alabama in the league. The face of Alabama production has been Derrick Henry, but the list is remarkable even without him. You have Mark Ingram, Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, Eddie Lacy, Najee Harris, Damian Harris, Trent Richardson, TJ Yeldon, Brian Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, etc., etc., etc. In the past 10 years, after Saban had gotten multiple classes into the NFL, Alabama running backs have combined for 38,882 rushing yards in the NFL. The next closest school in this time period has 21,000. Let that sink in for a little bit. And if that domination isn't enough, Alabama also has the 5 highest producing running back seasons in the NFL this century. The best being in 2022, where Alabama backs combined for 6,199 rushing yards in the NFL. I could talk about running back accolades for Alabama forever, but let's move on to the DBs. This century, Alabama DBs have combined for 251 interceptions, 1,072 passes defended, 93 forced fumbles, over 9,000 tackles, and 307 tackles for loss. While there are some vets like Roman Harper and Deshae Townsend who led the way, things really picked up when Saban got players like Minkah Fitzpatrick, Trevon Diggs, Eddie Jackson, Landon Collins, Patrick Surtain, HaHa Clinton-Dix, Kareem Jackson, Drake Kirkpatrick, Levi Wallace, Xavier McKinney, Brian Branch, and many, many more. It shouldn't be a surprise that since 2010, Alabama leads almost all DB stat categories with 215 interceptions, 840 passes defended, 72 forced fumbles, 7,200 tackles, 234 tackles for loss, an absolute factory. Recently, during the 2021 NFL season, former Alabama DBs combined for 32 interceptions in a season. The team with the second most this century had 24 in a season. The Crimson Air defense is no joke. Moving along to the defensive line, it shouldn't be a surprise that Alabama has produced a ton of talent here too. It started with Cornelius Griffin and Mark Anderson prior to Saban, when they combined for over 60 sacks, 110 TFLs, and 600 tackles this century. Overall, Alabama D linemen have combined for 400.5 sacks, 649 tackles for loss, 5,000 tackles, 70 forced fumbles, and 219 passes defended. Those combined stats put them in 5th this century, but they're even higher since 2010, only trailing Ohio State and Mississippi State. This is thanks to production from Marcel Darius, Darren Payne, Jerron Reed, Jonathan Allen, Quinton Williams, A'Shawn Robinson, Christian Barmore, Will Anderson, Dalvin Tomlinson, and many more. Alabama has put a ton of great interior D linemen to the league in the past 2 decades. It'll be interesting to see if they can keep that momentum of edge rusher production, with Will Anderson being drafted last year and now Dallas Turner in this year's class. If you've enjoyed the video so far, please consider subscribing and supporting the channel. Maybe we can even hit 50 subs, but let's keep moving along. In the aerial attack, Bama receivers put up 41,000 receiving yards and 224 touchdowns this century. 7th in receiving production for Alabama this century may be a surprise to some, but the truth is, before Saban and Julio paved the path, Bama did not have a lot of wide receiver success in the NFL. The best receiving season by an Alabama receiver the century prior to Julio being drafted was Jason McAdley with 362 yards in 2002. Since Julio was drafted in 2011, Alabama ranks second in receiving yards with 40,000 and third in receiving touchdowns with 223. This is thanks to not only Julio, but also Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, Jerry Jeudy, Jameson Williams, and John Mechie. In the 2023 NFL season, Alabama receivers combined for 5,690 receiving yards, which is the second most all time. Only Miami has gotten more, with 5,798 yards in the 1995 season. Additionally, Alabama and Ohio State are the only two schools with over 5,000 receiving yards in the NFL in each of the last two seasons. So things are really trending up and fast. Speaking of trending up, it was DeMeco Ryans that led the way in the linebacker production prior to the Saban era. The now head coach had nearly 1,000 tackles and 70 plus TFLs in his career. He, alongside Jared Johnson, paved the path for players like Donta Hightower, CJ Mosley, Philando McClain, Courtney Upshaw, Mack Wilson, Rashaan Evans, Christian Harris, Anthony Jennings, and more. Bama linebackers combined for 68 forced fumbles, 41 interceptions, 145 sacks, over 6,300 tackles, and 462 tackles for loss. Many of you may be surprised by the quarterback ranking being so low, with Bryce Young, Mac Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, and while many of you will also claim Jalen Hurts, and I'll allow it, I do not include in my numbers to stay consistent with everyone's stats going to the last school they attended or the school which they were drafted from. The truth is, while Alabama has been great at producing quarterbacks for the past 5 years, that was not the story for the rest of the century. Brody Croyle, AJ McCarron, and Greg McElroy did not pan out in the NFL. Overall, here's how the QB stats stack up. 27,509 passing yards, 153 touchdowns, 13 game-winning drives, and 124 starts. While those numbers are not super high for the century, they are climbing very fast. In fact, Alabama had the second most passing yards out of all schools last year in the NFL, only trailing Oklahoma. Tua and Bryce will continue to put up numbers, while Mac will wait for his next potential shot to make a difference. As for tight ends, that was one of the few positions that Saban did not produce a lot during his tenure. O.J. Howard and Irv Smith make up about 75% of all Alabama tight end production this century. Bama tight ends combined for 3,783 receiving yards and 40 receiving touchdowns. And lastly, we'll hit on some of the many stud offensive linemen from Alabama. You have All-Pro and Pro Bowler Evan Mathis. You have second team All-Pro and Pro Bowler Ryan Kelly, as well as Pro Bowlers Chris Samuels and Landon Dickerson. This is, of course, not mentioning the countless first-round picks at offensive line almost yearly during the Saban tenure. After all, a lot of Saban's success started in the trenches. Overall, Alabama was an absolute factory in churning out NFL talent this century, and especially from 2010 and on. But what do you guys think? Will DeBoer be able to keep the factory running? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please consider subscribing for future content. And as always, thanks for watching.